So
You're in order, Senator Bolton.
Yeah, it's the same question. I'm trying to figure out how we know when the 24-hour clock starts in this language.
Yeah. Thank you, Senator Bolton. So I contacted the Secretary of State's office. So it's when they receive it and open up the mail.
When they receive it in the mail?
The county auditor.
So does it depend on when the county auditor picks up the mail that day?
So when I talked to Secretary of State's office, it would be when they open up the mail.
Okay. And is there any requirement in here of documenting what time of day the mail was? And you said opened up, actually. So is it in each individual letter has a different time that the 24 hours begins?
So it's put in place so that the auditors make sure that they contact the voter and not sit on it for an extended period of time. So a county auditor would receive it whenever they normally do, and then they would sit down and they would open it up.
Okay,
So I would imagine that would be the same day.
Yeah, I would imagine the same day. It's just I'm trying to clarify, because I mean we're talking about the right to vote, pretty substantive right. If it's going to be at 24 hours and 2 minutes, a timer goes off, and we no longer have the ability to correct the error here. We need to be clear about that. So you've said it's when the mail is opened. So it's each individual application at its moment of opening, the 24 hours starts then.
So it says right here, the commissioner shall, within 24 hours after receipt of the absentee ballot request, contact the applicant by telephone, electronic mail. So it says it right there. I got it from the Secretary.
It does not say it right there, Senator. I'm asking what is the moment that the 24 hours starts, not when it ends.
I will continue to say the same answer that I have before. I contacted the Secretary of State's office. Okay. I asked them this specific question, and they told me the mail is delivered, and then they would sit down, the county auditor would sit down and open it up. Okay. And then when they opened it up, that would be the 24 hours. And so normal procedure would be you would receive the mail anywhere, let's just say 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., and then you would sit down, the county auditor would open up the mail.
Okay.
And then if something's missing, they would contact, and they would have 24 hours to do that.
So let's say instead of one application coming in the mail, there's, I don't know, 100. Is it the moment that I open up each individual application that the 24 hours runs? Because it's an important distinction. If I'm a county auditor, I need to know when that clock starts. So if I have a day where there's 500 ballot requests, or ballot requests coming in, I need to know if I need to stagger out when I'm opening those so I'm not running the risk of expiring that timeline on someone's right to vote because we were overwhelmed with the number of corrections that day. So again, I just want to make it very, very clear, because this is the fundamental right to vote. We don't want to miss anything. You're telling me that it's the moment that the envelope is opened is when this 24-hour clock starts. And if that's true, how do we record each individual envelope? Because the postmark's not going to tell us that. There's nothing else that's going to let us know when this moment happens other than hopefully a county auditor checks the watch, writes down this person's request came in at this time. Is that right?
So it would be the county auditor. It says right here, I'll read it again. The commissioner shall, within 24 hours after receipt of the absentee ballot request, contact the applicant by telephone and electronic mail. So it's up to the county auditor to do this. Now, if they want to come up with a practice that they want to make a note on the envelope, they can do that if they'd like. It could be through the rule process. I served on the ARC committee for a number of years. Sometimes rules will come through, and the county auditor can decide how they're going to do it. So it's put in place to contact within 24 hours. I've answered your question, I think, 4 times now.
We'll try for one. I want to know if I have a county auditor in County A and county auditor in County B, and they have completely different practices. County auditor in County A does the write down in a journal or a ledger. I opened envelope 16 that we've numbered 16 at 11:21 a.m. And then in County B, we just put down the mail was checked at 3 p.m., 500 ballots came in. We'll see who got open first and last, I guess. But we're gonna say that somebody's right to vote may be affected because they didn't get 24 hours. They only got 20 hours or maybe 14 hours because their envelope wasn't opened at the same time.
So this is on the county auditor to do. This has nothing to do with the voter. The
Correct.
county auditor shall, I'll read it again, the commissioner shall,
You've read the language,
within
Senator. I
24
don't...
hours after the receipt of absentee ballot request, contact the applicant by telephone, electronic mail. This is to put in place, so it's not 48, 72, whatever, within 24 hours, which is a reasonable amount of time, for a auditor to contact the voter to get the information. And we got to keep in mind, what information is this? It goes back to what I said. This is when you call your credit card company and you want to talk to them and you want to say, I'd like to talk to my account, and they say, oh, what's your mother's maiden name? And you say, I don't know, they're not going to talk to you. So if the information is not put in there, they're not going to send the ballot out to you. They will contact you within 24 hours and get that information, and then they'll send it out. Everybody will still get to vote. Nobody's vote, they'll still get their absentee ballot.
Well,
I don't know what more I need to say.
I think you need to say a lot more if you're going to have this be the way we determine somebody's actual constitutional right to vote. You keep talking about how the county auditor is going to do this, and that's the whole point. The voter has no control. What a county auditor is going to have is that internal office policy. And the problem is, Senator, we've got 24 hours to make this turnaround. There's no specification of exactly how that 24 hours begins. You keep reading the language of the bill that does not tell us how we document that 24 hours starting or when exactly it begins. And I appreciate you reading that language. Please don't read it again. It's not going to be in there. And what we want to know is to make sure that person in County A and person in County B don't have very different rights. And when I look at this language, you still haven't given me any assurance that County A and County B will not drastically affect the right to vote in that situation, especially when something's missing.
Are you asking
We
me
have
to
a
yield?
defect in the form, right?
Okay, so here, let me explain it. You have the auditor. This is on the auditor, not on the voter.
Right.
24 hours of contact. If the auditor fails to do that, that is not on the voter. That's on the auditor. It does not negate the absentee ballot request form. This is the auditor. It's their job to contact. If they do not contact, they are not following the law. It does not negate the absentee ballot request. So everybody will still get to vote. I don't know why you would stand here on the floor and say someone wouldn't be able to vote if the auditor doesn't contact in 24 hours. That's the auditor's job. It has nothing to do with the voter. I don't know why you would stand here. Please do not interrupt me. I didn't interrupt you. Please show me the same respect.
Senators, will you
I
please
showed
approach the well? Senator Bolton, you're in order.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think we have clarification that apparently if we have we really have created no actual duty on a county auditor and a commissioner of elections to follow this 24-hour requirement. And in the end, it shouldn't matter if you're in County A or County B and the auditor has a policy or doesn't have a policy, because even if the auditor never fulfills this obligation whatsoever, the ballot still goes out, the ballot comes in, the vote's counted. Which is surprising to me because it seems like this language that has been drafted here is basically meaningless in the end. It's completely unenforceable, has no effect of law. It's just a practice pointer for a county auditor. At least that's what the discussion that we've had says as we go back to the language in the bill, go back to the language in the bill, go back to the language in the bill. The next question I have come up is when we get to the notice that goes out, again, we have a defect in this system somehow, some way. Something's missing in the process. So now we're asking this to be followed up in a defective system. If the defect is, for example, the voter's address, how do we correct that? If we don't have an email address, and I guess I don't know if I should ask Senator Breitbach or Senator Smith to yield on this, but Senator Smith, if you would like to take the question.
Senator Smith, will you yield?
Yes, I'll yield.
You're in order, Senator Bolton.
So Senator Smith, my next question is, if the defect is the address, we don't have an email address, how does the county auditor verify this information?
They do not have an email address?
Correct.
Okay, so in your hypothetical on the absentee ballot request form, it's sent in, and what is missing is the email address. Is that correct?
So the email address, we don't have an email address. Just the person doesn't have one. The defect in the application is the mailing address. Somebody has maybe transposed a number, for example. And so when I, as a county auditor, look up that person's street address, and it says 3116, but there is no 3116 on Elm Street. I don't have an email address to go to. How do I know what voter we're talking about? How do I verify? How do I get to the root of that problem?
You call the phone number.
Okay. No answer. Maybe the person doesn't have a phone even. We don't have a phone. We don't have an email address. All we have is a legitimate right to vote, an address, and some sort of error in the numbers of that address.
Okay, so how would the ballot, so if the address is incorrect and they go to mail the ballot, it would never get there because it's the wrong address. So that doesn't work. Yeah.
That's the whole problem is, I know I have a registered voter, their application that came in clearly has the wrong address. I, as a county auditor, can see that the address is wrong.
Are you asking me?
So how do I verify that person and get them to their right to vote?
Yeah. Okay, so this is what happens. In your hypothetical, so I'm going to walk through this to make sure we have this correct. All right, so the first one is you would contact the email. If there's no email, you contact the phone number. If there's no phone number, you send a letter. You would send a letter and you would say you have information that is missing, you need to contact back. And if you're saying that the address is incorrect, and so there's no phone number, there's no email,
right,
and the address is incorrect, how in the world are you ever going to send them a ballot if you don't even have the correct address? And I would say that's open to fraud. We got some big problems there. Did I answer your question?
I don't think it does, because what if we had the option of checking the voter's registration and we can see it wasn't 3167, it was 3117. And it's right there on the registration. Clearly, it was a transposed number.
Okay, I'm going to say this one more time. Okay, the auditor will contact by phone number. If there's no phone number, then email. There's no email, they'll send a letter in the address. And if the address is wrong, there's no way on earth you could send them a ballot, even if this wasn't law. So I don't understand where someone wouldn't be able to vote. And if you're going to stand on this floor and say they can't vote, then you're just making things up.
I haven't said that at all, Senator. I'm just trying to figure out how we verify this process. And all I want to know is, if I'm a county auditor, I see a mailing address that's been clearly transposed when I compare the voter registration to the ballot request. Can I send the mail based on the voter registration, or do I have to just follow the errant application?
Senator, can you repeat that question, please?
Yeah. And
There was noise back here, and I didn't hear. Could you repeat it one more time, please?
Yeah. Well,
You're
maybe.
asking lots of questions with lots of hypotheticals, and I want to make sure I answer them crystal clear for you.
Correct. I've asked 2 questions, and it's one hypothetical in this question. So if the application has a transposed number, I, as the county auditor, have determined, even though we don't have a phone number, we don't have an email address, I've just checked the voter registration of this name, and I found quite clearly you have just transposed the first 2 numbers of your street address. Everything else is fine. Can I use the voter registration file to send out a request for you to correct your ballot request?
So in your hypothetical, there's no phone number.
No phone number, no
There's
email
no
address.
email. Is that correct?
Correct.
And what's the next hypothetical? There's no email, there's no phone number, and you transpose the number. Is that correct?
The only error made by this voter is they have transposed the first 2 numbers of their mailing address. I, as the county auditor, can tell by that voter's registration what their actual address is. Can I use their voter registration information to send the request to get them to send back a non-transposed number on their mailing address?
So you could check their registration and see what their address is under and verify the address to send them a letter to say that you need to provide your identification and anything that's missing.
Okay. Thank you, Senator. So I just want to make this very clear. We can trust the voter file to send the mail back out, and I'm going to ask you to simply transpose the numbers back to where they should have been, but we can't trust the voter file for me to just say, you've clearly made a mistake on your number. And we're talking about the constitutional right to vote. Who's at a disadvantage in that situation? It's probably not most voters, but it probably disproportionately is going to affect a voter with dyslexia. Or how about another error? What if the error is that I listed an address that I lived at 20 years ago because I have Alzheimer's? And at the moment I was making this application, I thought my current address was the one I lived at 20 years ago. I have good days, I have bad days. This was a bad day. County auditor can see that in my voter history I've just used an old address. They're going to look up in that voter information file and see that we're going to send this request out to you again and have you write down the address that we clearly know you live at, because that's where we're going to send the mail. And there's a tight timeline on the turnarounds here. That's a real obstacle to voting. And Senator Smith, I'd ask you to yield hopefully just one more time.
Senator Smith, will you yield?
Yes, I'll yield.
You're in order, Senator Bolton.
Can we agree that persons with dyslexia, persons that have dementia or Alzheimer's, are going to be more adversely affected by your legislation than others?
Absolutely not.
Okay? What about a person who is homebound or in a care facility? That person probably needs the right to vote by mail more than most others. That person is going to have to go through a longer correction process, right? Like let's say if I'll give you one last hypothetical here, Senator. If I show up to vote at the actual polling place and I have an error in part of my voter information, I can fix that error on the spot, right? I can bring in, let's say the error is in my mailing address. I can bring in a letter, some proof of residency, and my voter ID, and I can correct that error on the spot as I'm voting, correct?
Are we talking about at the polls?
At the polls.
You would show your ID, yes.
Right. I'm going to show my ID. I'm going to fix whatever error is there. We're going to do it all in the same day. The person who's voting by mail will no longer be able to have that all done the same day. We're going to have a multi-staged interaction, right?
Well, an absentee ballot was requested 120 days out. The cutoff is 10 days out from the election, so if there's anything missing, there's plenty of time to get that information from the voter, and that's exactly why we mandate that they call them within 24 hours to speed that process up.
And that voter who, let's say, 2 weeks before the election, I've decided I need an absentee ballot, I need to vote by mail, send in my request, there's an error in it. Again, I don't have an email address, I don't have a phone number. I'm going to have that error fixed by having the mail come back to me and then go back into the county auditor's office just to get the request to come in. And then I'm going to have the ballot mailed to me and mailed back. That's all going to take place over a full week period. Is that correct?
Well, I would say in the very, very large percentage of time, people will fill out the corrected information, so it'll be business like usual, no problem.
Sure.
And then if they need to fix anything, the auditor would contact them via email or phone, and that could happen within 5 minutes. So that would take care of most of the situations. If they couldn't contact them, then the letter would be sent out to them.
Okay. So it's going to work a lot better for people that have a phone number, people who have an email address, people who show up directly at the polls. It's just a real problem for people that don't have reliable phone service and don't have the ability to access the internet and have an email address. Those are the ones that are going to have a lot harder time with this. Is that fair?
We have procedures put in place that if there's no phone or there's no email, then they would send them a letter. So that's why we have deadlines that are 10 days out and not 2 days out from the election, and therefore there's plenty of time to get the information. This is about security. This is about making sure the people that vote are the right ones. It's something that's important to me. It's important to our caucus that we have voters that's who they say. And I do need to remind you that in the court opinion, it says it may be even more reasonably of a fit of a case in a voting absentee where the voter is not seen in person at the polling place. And in trial testimony, it revealed that mail-in absentee voter fraud is more prevalent in Iowa than in-person voting at the polls. So we have a court case that says we need to check their ID. This is how we do it via the absentee to make sure that we have fair elections here in Iowa. And when people know there's fair elections, they want to turn out and vote, and that's what brought us to record turnouts in 2018 when it was predicted that we'd have voter suppression. And our track record is that we have 100% of the time predicted it. So when you sit over there and you say that you're going to predict that it's going to be a harder time, your track record in this chamber on voter ID is not accurate.
Point of order has been called. Senator, please state your point.
And he's out of line.
I don't think he said anything there that was grossly out of line, Senator. I hear some snickering. Let me read Rule 9 again. The senator shall confine all remarks to the question under debate and shall avoid discussing personalities or implications of improper motives. I don't see anything any more grossly out of line than when I said Senator Sinclair's point of order was not well taken because of a more general question that Senator Bolton asked.
Thank you, Senator. I think we got a really powerful answer there. We're going to make sure the people who are voting are the right ones. Very clearly, in this system, the right ones are not people who have a hard time voting. Like, the whole purpose of voting by mail is to make sure people who cannot make it to the ballot box, that's how I started this process in Iowa, get a chance to cast their ballot. And the people that have obstacles tend to be poorer Iowans who don't have reliable internet access, who do not have reliable phone service, are going to have to really get their ballots straightened out early if they're going to have a voice in our elections. More affluent Iowans who have an email address to put down, who have a phone number to put down, are going to be able to get things sorted out right away under this legislation. But a lot of Iowans are not. And when you think about who needs to vote by mail, you think about the people who have barriers to voting at the polls. And as we stand in a public health emergency, with the CDC and others telling us a second wave is coming, we're going to have people who need to participate through the mail-in process, and they are going to be at a disadvantage to have their voice heard. It's not just the right ones that should get the right to vote. All our citizens should be getting the right to vote. All our citizens should not be impaired in their ability to exercise their voice in this system of government. And while I understand your point, Senator Smith, that you want to eliminate voter fraud, on the way to get there, Senator, you are eliminating voters. This legislation was a bad idea when it came on its own. This legislation is a bad idea in an appropriations bill. I hope we can reject it.
The chair recognizes the senator from Story, Senator Kornbach.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. When I turned my light on about a half an hour ago, it was with the intention of agreeing with my dear colleague from Cedar Falls, Senator Giddens. He has correctly pointed out that this budget, again, is shortchanging education. Let me add a few more details to that. Before the tide of self-congratulatory rhetoric gets going with regard to K-12, no, you're not cutting K-12 tonight. The reason is that you've been cutting K-12 over the last 3 years. In inflation-adjusted terms, we would need to be spending about $70 to $75 million more than is the current budget in front of us in order just to get back up to the level of real spending that we had 2 fiscal years back. The story is even worse with regard to the regents. The regents were cut, I believe, $33 million a couple of years ago in nominal dollars. A few of those dollars were put back last year, but now we're looking at an $8 million additional cut. A lot of happy talk tonight about a status quo budget. Not true when it comes to our Regents universities. The Regents universities' financial situation this fall is going to be very difficult even without this budget cut. We're anticipating a significant loss of students. A fair number of students simply won't be coming back. My guess would be, and it's just a guess, but I think it's actually pretty optimistic, that we might lose between the three universities maybe 5,000 students. That would equate to between $35 and $40 million if they're all in state, and of course much more if we lose out-of-state students. I especially am fearful of losing international students who simply don't want to come to this country that has so badly fumbled our handling of the COVID pandemic. So if we're losing even, let's be optimistic, $35 to $40 million in tuition revenue, an additional $8 million in cut, are going to put the universities in a very, very severe situation. Now, the Board of Regents has so far committed to a tuition freeze for the fall semester. Statutorily, they do have the ability to revisit that. And so that promise of a freeze may have to be revised. In any case, they are committed only for the fall semester. So I fully anticipate a significant increase in what I call the tuition tax, and it is a tax on students and parents and families, a significant increase in tuition tax in the spring semester. Along the way, it is likely that to absorb this kind of budget cut, the universities will have to lay off a lot of people whose services, in fact, would be more needed than ever because of the ongoing process of making transition to online education and other adjustments to the environment of the pandemic. So this is not a status quo budget for the Regents universities. It is not an adequate budget for the K-12, and I'm going to be a no on this budget.
The senator from Dubuque, Senator Yoakum, you're in order.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, would Senator Smith yield to some questions, please?
Senator Smith, would you yield?
Yes, I'll yield.
Senator Yoakum, you're in order.
Thank you, Mr. President, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Senator Smith. So, Senator Smith, we are striking the ability of the county auditor to fill in the request for absentee ballot information by best means available and prohibiting the auditor from filling that information in. Is that correct?
What information are you referring to?
Missing information or
Yes.
inaccurate information, either or.
Yes, to send the absentee ballot request form.
Yes,
Or
this
to
is on
send
the request.
to
Thank
send
you.
To send the actual ballot, but they could look it up to send a letter to
Yes.
inform them that they have something missing and they
Right,
need
so
to
they no longer
contact
can
them.
use best means available, but have to either call, email, or mail that applicant to obtain any missing information within 24 hours. Correct?
Yes.
Thank you. Now, it also says, I also want to know, was this same information saying that they can no longer use the best means available included in the 2017 voter ID law? Was that same amendment in the voter ID law of 2017?
Well, we are striking it out, so yes, it was in the 2017 law.
Okay, thank you. That's what I wanted to know. And then if, right now, a lot of folks will fill in like the last 4 digits of their social security number instead of putting down either their driver's license number or their voter verification number. They get that kind of mixed up. So they put their last 4 digits of their social security number down instead. So in the past, when they did that, the auditor could go into their database and they could correct that information. They have their social security number in that voter registration database, By law, we changed that back in the 90s when we start worrying about identity theft and said you no longer can put the Social Security number on the driver's license, etc. Put a different number on and link it back to the Social Security number in a confidential file within a public office, like an auditor's office. So in the past, the auditor could look it up, realize that the voter was the person who they said they were, because it matches their last 4 digits of their social, but they put the social down on the request form rather than their driver's license number or their voter identification number, or verification number. They no longer can do that. Is that correct? They no longer can make that correction on the request for an absentee ballot. Is that correct?
So in the 4-digit number that you're referring to, if they put an inaccurate number, then the auditor would contact them to verify they are the person who they are saying that they are, and we have a court ruling saying that that is okay, that they can do that.
No, they put down their last 4 digits of their Social Security number. It's accurate, but the request form asks for their driver's license number or their voter verification number.
Senator Yoakum, I do have the State of Iowa official absentee ballot request form. It asks for a 4-digit voter PIN that can be found on your voter identification card. If they do not write that 4-digit number in correctly, then they need to be contacted.
And that was what I was asking. So they put down their Social Security number instead of that 4-number PIN number, and the auditor can no longer accept that and correct it. They have to contact them by phone, by email, or mail. Is that correct?
That is an
All right.
incorrect number that they put down. So an incorrect number, to verify who they are, they need to contact them by phone, email, or they can send them a letter to verify who they are. Just like when you go
Even
to the
though
poll.
the Social
Senator
Security
Yoakum,
number
please
matches
do
up.
not interrupt me, as I did not interrupt you.
Thank you,
Please
Senator.
show me
I'm
the
done.
same respect
Thank you,
I
Senator.
showed you.
Point of
Thank you,
order has been
Senator.
called. Senator, please state your point.
Rude to the person who has the floor. She has the floor, and so she's the lead speaker. When you're told as the lead speaker to be quiet, inappropriate in the Senate. It's inappropriate for a senator to disrespect another senator like that.
The Senate will be at ease. Senate will be in order. Senator Yoakum, you're in order.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Smith. So let me close with this. This very same language was in the voter ID legislation from 2017 that prohibited the auditors from filling in that missing information by best means available on the request form, and required them, like this is doing, that they had to either call, email, or mail the applicant to get that missing information. What the court said when they struck that down was that limiting the auditor's use of the database was irrational, illogical, and wholly unjustifiable. I might also add that many people, and I suppose some in this room may have even done it, rather than putting in your driver's license number on your request form, or even knowing what your PIN number is on your voter ID number, you put down your Social Security number. And up until this point, and still, unless this gets passed into law, the auditor could go into that voter database, verify that it is the person who they say they are because the Social Security number matches, and they correct that information on the request form. They know who the person is. The Social Security number is there. So what is most interesting about this whole discussion is that the auditor, by voter ID law, is mandated to use a voter database to confirm voter ID before giving a ballot to someone. But yet, we are now saying the auditor cannot use that same database to fill in missing information on a request for the ballot. You can spin this any way you want. Any way you want, but the bottom line is you are making it harder for voters to vote by mail, especially during a pandemic. Thank you, Mr. President.
The chair recognizes the senator from Black Hawk, Senator Dotzler.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is the kind of thing that happens at 3:30 in the morning on a Sunday. You know, I remember a few years back when we were in the majority and Senator Gronstal tried to bring a bill up that you felt you didn't have enough time to look at, and he wanted to have a vote, and you went to caucus and you didn't come out for 3 days. And I sat here, and I know that Senator Zahn was sitting here, and Senator Warnstead, he was here at that time too. You know, I've been 10 years a budget chair of the Economic Development Budget, and I know that how difficult that is, but how important role it is to listen to all the departments, get their input, have people come in that represented some of the very areas that we fund at our Regents universities, listen to them, listen to the projects, small business development centers, hear what's going on, and make a determination where is the best place to put those resources. And here I am, the ranking member of a budget. I've had people call me and ask me about various things within this budget that we were supposed to be working on. As a member of the full Appropriations Committee, and all I could say was, I don't know, I haven't seen anything. I haven't seen anything. But as soon as I know, I'll give you a call. Well, I have more respect for them to call them at 2 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday when we were supposed to really, the number one thing we were supposed to do as senators in this extra time that we're spending was to get this budget done. 2 o'clock in the morning, I hear about it. And now I find out we've got policy bills that can affect the most fundamental right that Americans have, a keystone of democracy, our right to vote. Wars were fought over this. People died over the fact that we can, as Americans, pick who we want to represent us. And to me, it's pretty clear that we are making it more difficult for individuals to vote by mail than any other way. Now, I heard the word dyslexic a few times, and I'll have to admit, there's been kind of a running joke that people hear I'm dyslexic and they think I write all my words upside down and backwards, and some of the extreme dyslexics do. And I have to admit, there have been times where I wrote my phone number down, and for some reason I did transpose the last 2 numbers. And I've learned a lot about the human brain. Dyslexia is kind of like being right-handed and left-handed. It's your left lobe that dyslexics don't access like most people. They are a right brain, right-handed type person. Now, my mother, who has brain damage, over a year ago, she had a brain aneurysm, and because of her blood thinners, a blood vessel broke in her brain, and it was on her left lobe. And the pressure built up in it, and it kept building up, and because she was 90 at the time, they couldn't cut her skull off like they did to somebody who was out in the lobby and allow that blood to get out to stop the pressure because they thought it would kill her. And they couldn't give her painkillers. And she wanted to die, and we were surprised she didn't. But her left lobe was damaged. And I've learned so much about how that affected her. She has difficulty speaking unless you're talking about the past, and she can converse just like normal. She's always voted her whole life. I've got a cell phone picture of her when she's watching the news, so intent on what's going on. She's very much aware of everything. I never talk politics with her, but she talks it with me. But she has difficulty writing, and when I'm not around and nobody's around, she's working to try to write things out, her name, things she can sign her name, she can do all that. But she knows who she wants to vote for. Well, she's one of those individuals that can't really put that down. And she gets so frustrated that she says to me, why can't I talk? I don't know why I'm so dumb now. She said, I was all right till they stole my brain. Well, there are people out there that deserve to have that right to vote. And Senator Bolton pointed out some serious flaws with this bill. It could have been fixed if we would have had some time to work on it. Now we're spending an hour on just one thing that shouldn't even be in this budget bill. And we're talking about something that's going to spend billions of dollars. The most important thing we can do is have oversight and have a conversation about what we learned as individual ranking members and chairs of our committees. And I know that some of your committee chairs really didn't get consulted in what was going on in this bill at all. And here it is. Our nerves are on edge. We're tired. We don't think the way we should. And God help somebody if they're leaving this place whenever it is, if it's 4, well, it ain't going to be 4. We got several more bills to do in this death march to the sea. If it's 6 o'clock in the morning and I've been up for 24 hours and I'm driving down the road and I'm tired, and I've had it happen to me before after working third shift, where all of a sudden I blacked right out for a second with my eyes wide open. And you're putting every one of us at risk, because dead tired driving can be just as dangerous as drunk driving. And here we are. I can't even communicate with people back home about the budget and what their concerns were, because I'm not going to call them at 4 o'clock in the morning. You know what? This is no way to run this show. You always get your way. The majority always gets their way. But I learned one thing of working with the business community and being on boards my whole adult life. Conflict resolution always ends up in a better result than if somebody on one side has one idea and they don't listen to anybody else. And you've got a bill here that is so flawed, is probably not constitutional from what I'm hearing from Senator Yoakum. You ought to be ashamed of yourselves. Because, you know, we always hear about, well, you treated us this way, so we're going to treat you that way. Well, as Democrats, we didn't. We didn't go to caucus for 3 days. I think we ought to end this thing on this bill and come back. It's time that we all sit down and take a step back. Now, I'm talking about from an individual, this is my 24th year, and I've never seen anything like this. In fact, we ended, it wasn't on a Sunday, it was about 4 o'clock in the morning, and we weren't fighting over a whole budget. We were fighting over just a couple of items. And I remember one of them was dealing with the research activity credits. And it happened to be a fight with Democrats against Democrats because we had a majority in both chambers. You know, I can see this. And I was sitting here, I was so tired before, I couldn't even understand what they were saying when we were going over the bill in our caucus until this got me worked up. Now I got my adrenaline going. But I got to tell you, if our constituents seen the way this is being run, they would not believe it. And I know we're going to have a bunch of mistakes when you do stuff like this. It always happens. We've done them before, and you got them in this bill. And I remember one of the things that was the most important deal to help with economic development in our businesses across the state was child care and dealing with affordability of it and making sure we had that. We're losing workers to this state with talent because they couldn't find child care. I never hear anything about that in this bill. It was like the issue. What happened to that? Mr. Leader, I think it's time to reconsider this. You know, are we going to be here so people can miss church? I heard before that the House was losing people, and the response I got from a person in this chamber was, well, that's their problem, not ours. I'm glad to see that the president, when he got worked up, he took a time out. I think this whole chamber needs to take a time out. We ought to think about it. Thank you.
Chair recognizes the senator from Polk, Senator Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would Senator Breitbach yield?
Senator Breitbach, will you yield? You're in order, Senator Peterson.
Thank you. Senator Breitbach, one of the items I was looking for in this budget was a piece coming from the state auditor's office. I know that the state auditor had requested, even before we came back, a change in the funding reform, making a funding reform change to his office to save money for the state and also to make sure that we would be avoiding fines in the way the auditor office is set up. Could you let me know what transpired and why that's not in the budget tonight?
Yes, I had the language. I talked to the auditor several times about it. We verified what the language was. We had it in our original proposal, but the House would not take it.
And what was their rationale? Because, I mean, we as a state could actually be fined for not fixing this issue that the auditor has been very clear this is something we need to address.
I understand that, and you'd have to ask the House why they insisted on not putting it in, because like I said, we asked for it, we requested it, but I don't know why they wouldn't do it.
Okay, well, I mean, that's frustrating because our auditor had pointed us out to, I think, all parties in the legislature to get this addressed. So seeing this in the final hours missing from the budget is extremely frustrating. My second question revolves around the governor and the $1.25 billion that she has received in federal funding. I don't see anything in this budget that has the legislative body having any connection with the governor's office on the spending of those dollars. Could you comment on the rationale behind that?
The monies came to the state, and the governor has the discretion to spend it as she feels fit.
So you, the majority party, is going to yield all discretion on the $1.25 billion solely to the governor with no legislative oversight, no task force like other states have established?
That's correct.
That is giving up a lot of power to the governor. And it's really quite interesting that you would give up that much power to the governor when over the past few days I've seen you concerned about a nonprofit tax fee price tag for the Secretary of State. I was hoping that we would have an opportunity for Iowans to engage in how those federal dollars were going to be distributed. I had hoped we'd have more contact with the governor when we suspended the session. Her office had promised us weekly meetings with the governor and her staff, and those lasted until April 1st. And then we were told if we wanted to know what the governor was doing in relation to COVID-19, that we could watch her pressers. So my faith in how the governor works with the legislature is not too high. The last thing I want to talk about in this budget, I guess more and more point on the governor. I have gotten so many emails from people about this Test Iowa program and what a missed opportunity for this legislative body to gather, to not put together any oversight on a $26 million no-bid contract to an out-of-state company that I said is barely even old enough to burp on its own. And they are responsible for testing Iowans on COVID-19. I would have thought that we would have taken our responsibility a little more seriously on how the governor is spending these dollars. Because from what I've seen so far, Iowans are being let down. The last point I want to make about this budget goes to the point that Senator Bolton and Senator Yoakum were making on the voter suppression component, which has nothing to do with the budget. It's a policy piece put in a budget bill in the wee hours of the session. And I believe that Senator Smith misspoke when he said, and maybe I should just ask him to yield, because I don't want to put words in his mouth.
Senator Smith, will you yield for a question?
Yes, I'll yield.
You're in order, Senator Peterson.
Thank you, Senator Smith. Senator Bolton had asked you a question, and you kept saying it was hypothetical. So I'm going to give you the example of my grandma. She lived to be almost 101. She lived on a farm in Cedar County, and then she went to Crestview Care Facility in Cedar County. When I took her to the care facility, and they were getting her and my grandpa their room, they asked if they wanted a phone. And my grandma said, "We don't need a phone because we can't hear. We just, like, it's more of like if somebody can just come get us. If you need to just come get us." And she joked that she thought my cousin Ruth had been emailing her. She said, I don't even know what an email is. So she had no phone, she had no email. And I'm thinking of the circumstances. Her penmanship was not great. So if she had gotten her address wrong, could the auditor look on the voter files to find out what my grandma's address was, to send my grandma a letter, which she won't be able to read on her own, but could the auditor look her up in the voter file to get the right address?
I want to make sure I ask an additional question to make sure I have this. Are you saying that there was no 4-digit PIN or driver's license number?
Well,
And
she
this
didn't. She didn't drive a car.
So, and this is a confined person?
So she wouldn't have a driver's license. She probably would have a 4-digit PIN. But if her address was wrong, if her address could the auditor look up my grandma's address to let her know you didn't have your 4-digit PIN, you're going to have to resend it, and your address was not quite right?
So this would be a confined person.
Pardon?
So it'd be a confined person?
I can't understand what you're saying.
A confined person? Is that your hypothetical? That would be 53.22.
Okay.
So a voter requesting or casting a ballot pursuant to section 53.22, which is a confined person, shall not be required to provide a voter verification number. So there would be no need to supply a verification number because she would be a confined person.
And so could the auditor then look her address up and see that it was off a digit or whatever and send it to her on the voter file?
Well, a confined person, you could call, or you could send in an absentee ballot request. So in your scenario,
No,
it would be absentee
my
ballot request.
question is, can the auditor look in the voter file to get my grandma's address? Because could he? She?
So on the address of the absentee ballot request, is that what you're asking?
Yeah, so the absentee ballot request, she's got her number off. And can the auditor then go to the voter file and see, that 4 is actually a 9 or whatever?
Yeah, so this would fall under 53.22, which is a confined person. So what ends up happening is you would send the request in, or you would call the auditor's office, and then a team of a Republican and a Democrat would go out to the confined person, and then they would then present it there. There is no identification needed under this, so therefore they could vote.
But they can't go into the care facility.
Who, the team?
The team, because we're in a pandemic.
Yes, they can. Because under Governor Kim Reynolds' executive order, she put in there that any closures shall not apply to anybody voting. Therefore, the act of voting. Therefore, the teams could go in there because that order does not apply, because in the executive order, it says it doesn't prevent anybody from voting. So yes, they can go in there.
So did the auditors go into all these care facilities this last election cycle?
No, they did not.
Why not?
The Secretary of State chose to use emergency rule to say that you can mail it. Normally, you would not mail it in Iowa code because it's a confined person.
Yeah.
You would take the ballot to them. In a pandemic, you can still take it to them because Governor Kim Reynolds in the proclamation said anything for vote.
The address. It says right here on line 17, a commissioner shall not use the voter registration system to obtain additional necessary information.
Yeah.
So but you had said earlier that they could, I believe, so I just wanted to make sure I understood. What it says in here, they can't like double check it across the voter.
So what we're referring to here is the act of contacting the voter to verify who they are, trust but verify. Under your scenario, the confined person under 53.22 could go out there with the team of two and
But
vote.
what if the person's not confined? What if it's a college kid?
Okay, now we're under new hypotheticals. So
Okay, do you want me to name a specific constituent? I've got a constituent that doesn't live in town, but they could look in the voter, this says they cannot look in the voter file.
So what ends up happening is when you ask me a hypothetical, I need to get all the variables to be able to give you a correct answer. And so therefore, if you ask me a new hypothetical, I'll have to ask questions to get all the variables to give you a correct answer. Do you want me to go through all that?
Sure, they don't have a phone. They don't have an email, so you're going to need to use the address, but the address is a little bit off, so you need to verify it against the voter file before you mail it. But this says here you can't, right?
So this is dealing about proving who the voter is. So if you need to mail it to them, yes, you can. And when I say mail it to them, it would be a new absentee ballot request form, not the ballot.
Yep.
You need to get the information to send the ballot to them. You would need to get that off of the information provided by the voter. So if anything is missing, you would contact them by phone, contact them by email, and then you would send them a letter. And it's okay to check all that information because you will send a new absentee ballot request form out, and then in return, they would send in the new one, and then the ballot would be sent in.
Yeah, okay. I think I just clarified it for myself. Thanks for your example. It does not allow them to use the voter file. This last election, primary election, I looked it up. We had, you guys beat us by one absentee voter. We had 19 Republican senators vote by home or whatever you want to call it, and we had 18. We had 100% participation on our senators, and you guys had 19. And I just think that we should not be putting more barriers to voting on Iowans, and especially when we know how well it worked this last time around. I especially don't like seeing a policy bill that suppresses the rights of Iowans in a budget bill in the final hours of session, and I would encourage a no vote.
The chair recognizes the senator from Johnson, Senator Walz.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President. I rise today to urge a no vote. It's 4 in the morning, and I think that we have not yet defined what the word receipt means in the context of this amendment, which is kind of amazing to me given the amount of conversation that we've had so far. The language in the bill reads, that the commissioner shall, and this is the new language, within 24 hours after the receipt of the absentee ballot request, contact the applicant by telephone and electronic mail if such information has been provided by the applicant. Now, it has not yet been made clear if receipt means that the ABR has been opened or if the ABR has been delivered to the office. The reason it's an important distinction is if, to Senator Bolton's example earlier, 500 ABR forms all show up on a single day, which is not unusual in some of our larger areas. Are we going to wind up creating an incentive where auditors, in their urge to comply with this new law, are going to only open the ABRs that they know they can actually respond to within the 24-hour period? If that is the case, then it's quite possible that we're going to end up seeing larger and larger stacks of these ABRs piling up because they're not going to be opened. If you open all 500 at once, but you've only got the capacity to send out 300 emails or 300 phone calls or what have you in that 24-hour period, or let's say they arrive on a Friday afternoon at 3 o'clock, and so you've only got a couple hours left in the business day. I mean, the question of what receipt means has not really been answered. It's not answered in the language, and it hasn't been answered yet here tonight on the floor. But that's only in Section 124. We had even gotten to Section 125 in the bill, where we've also got some other interesting questions. Now, if there's a single senator in this chamber who knows the last 4 digits of their voter ID PIN, I will buy you a beer if we reconvene. I mean, assuming that this debate eventually does end. When we reconvene in 2021, I will buy you a beer if any senator in this chamber knows the last 4 digits of their voter ID PIN. I definitely don't know mine. The other thing about the voter ID PIN to keep in mind, by the way, is that this Generation Z that's coming up, I'm not Generation Z myself, I'm an old millennial, but there's actually a Generation Z guy over in the House, Joe Mitchell. Ask him about his friends, he'll tell you, a lot of the Generation Z kids, they don't drive. They don't have driver's licenses, so they need this voter ID PIN in order to fill out the ABR in order to be able to vote by mail. Now, the thing that's interesting about what Senator Yoakum raised earlier about this issue with the last 4 digits of the Social Security number being put onto the ABR rather than the last 4 digits of your voter ID PIN number is that if the applicant, and here's what it says in Section 125, this is new language, if an applicant does not have current access to the applicant's voter verification number, the commissioner shall verify the applicant's identity prior to supplying the voter verification number by asking the applicant to provide at least 2 of the following facts about the applicant. 1, date of birth. 2, the last 4 digits of the applicant's Social Security number. 3, residential address. 4, mailing address. 5, middle name. 6, voter verification numbers defined in paragraph C. So it's quite possible that the information that will be needed under this proposed language in Section 125, this new paragraph D, will actually be on the absentee ballot request form when it's mailed in. So, Senator Smith, if you'd yield to just a quick question, I'd like to understand if this would be applicable and allow the ballot to be sent out.
Senator Smith, will you yield for a question?
Yes, I'll yield.
You're in order, Senator Walz.
Well, thank you very much, Senator Smith. So Senator Smith, we've been going through this analogy of contacting the credit card company, both in the debate last week and just earlier this morning. The information that would have to be provided to prove the verification of the applicant per the language in this bill includes the last 4 digits of the applicant's Social Security number and the date of birth. And so if the ABR comes in and it has the date of birth on it and it has the last 4 digits of the applicant's Social Security number, would you still have to send the notice out to try and get the quote-unquote correct information back in, or are we good to go and you can send the ballot out?
Well, it would not be correct information because the 4-digit PIN number is not correct. So this is about trust but verify. So the auditor would then need to go through the process of contacting them, which would be by phone, email, or mail to get the correct information.
Well, so in this case, what you're saying is, we don't have the correct information on the voter identification PIN specifically, But we'll go through the step. We open it up. We'll send them the letter. It gets there. It takes a couple days. They get it. Comes back. They open it back up. Now, even though we had the information that we needed all along to prove the identity with the 4 digits of the Social Security number, the date of birth, and maybe the middle name, but we had the address wrong. Now we're good to go. We've gotten it back. Even though the very same information that we would need to verify the address was actually there on the ABR the whole time.
Well, the absentee ballot request form needs to be filled out correctly. If someone puts inaccurate information, they would have to go through the steps. This is about trust, but verify. Auditors cannot assume that this is the correct person. Just like you need to show your ID when you go to the polls, we need to make sure this is the right person, and you do that by having the 4-digit PIN or the Iowa driver's license number or the non-operating ID number.
All right. Thank you, Senator Smith. I appreciate it. What I hope we just illustrated is that clearly, even if the information that is under this new law is being provided on the ABR when it comes in, if to Senator Bolton's example or Senator Yoakum's example or Senator Peterson's example, just one small thing is off, but the information that you would need to verify the applicant's identity under the new law is on the ABR. Even if all that is true, we're going to add several days to the process of sending a note back out and a note coming back in. And what occurred to me just a little bit ago is that it's already Sunday. Now, Father's Day was not really a prominent holiday in my household growing up, but Father's Day is in a week. And if you haven't already started thinking about what your Father's Day gift is going to be, well, then congratulations. You understand the challenge that we have here. When you've only got a 10-day window outside of the election to get your absentee ballot in and get your ballot back, I presume not everybody in this chamber has finished their Father's Day shopping. And there are going to be a lot of voters who, when they have these extra days tacked on to this process by this law, are not going to be able to vote by mail. So, Mr. President, I urge a no vote. I think this is a bad bill for Iowans, and I think especially in the middle of a pandemic, we should be making it easier to vote by mail, not harder. Thank you.
The senator from Polk, Senator Bisignano, you're in order.